Welcome to Good Tips for Hard Times, where we find smarty pants experts who can give you advice to help you get through your day. So, thank you everyone for tuning in and joining us. I'm Anita Sarkeesian. I'm a media critic, a public speaker, and the executive director of the Games and Online Harassment Hotline, which is a new emotional support resource for the gaming community. On today's show, I'm joined by security expert Leigh Honeywell. Hello, Leigh.
Hey, thanks for having the show.
We're so excited to talk to you. So Leigh is the founder and CEO of Tall Poppy, which is where it's an organization that is going to help companies protect their employees from online harassment. I don't know why I said that in the future tense because you are currently doing that, which is amazing. And also, she was previously a fellow at the ACLU, and before that worked at a bunch of tech companies, including Slack and Microsoft. So quite the pedigree. I am so excited that you agreed to do this with us. I feel very personal. This topic is very personal to me. I think that online safety is such an important part of our lives that folks tend to feel really confused about or don't know how to approach that like there's so much information online and we're so connected that it can sometimes feel a little daunting to figure out how to like be safe or safer, right? Caveat, I'm going to say safe. I don't mean that you can actually fully be safe, right? That we work towards the goal of more safety. So, yeah, I guess I wanted to start like a little high level, if you would humor me. Like, what does it actually mean to be safer online?
Oh man, I think of it so much from a sort of public health perspective, in that I often get people when I'm working with someone or who's not necessarily like facing threats directly themselves. They're like, well, I don't care if somebody hacks into my email. I have nothing to hide. And the thing is, whether or not we as individuals have something to hide, much like we should all be wearing masks to protect each other from the Rona, not to protect ourselves, but to protect each other. We all are the sort of custodians of other people's secrets. We all have, that email we got from a friend where they're talking about their stressful divorce situation, or another friend asking us for medical advice. We're the custodians of each other's secrets. So any one of us taking steps to have better personal security practices, online safety practices, has that sort of herd immunity effect of keeping other people safe. So in the work that I do, I really focus on getting people to understand those basics, getting people to take concrete, specific steps towards improving their personal online safety, whether it's, the stuff we're going to talk about, like password managers and two-factor authentication, or just sort of, it often sort of segues into like media awareness and being thoughtful about what different websites we use and what social media accounts we spin up, because, there's always I still don't really understand TikTok, and there's always a new network coming up. Yeah. So taking that sort of high level public health perspective in the same way as like encouraging people to floss or encouraging people to wash their hands, the work that we do is often around those digital security basics, password managers, two-factor authentication, keeping your computer up to date. You mentioned that I previously worked at Microsoft. I was literally on the team that every second Tuesday of the month reboots everybody's Windows machine. Sorry, but that's how often security vulnerabilities come out.
Yeah.
And one of the most important things you can do to keep yourself safe from the like random internet miscreants is literally just installing the security updates that your cell phone and computer manufacturers send you. It's like if I sound exasperated, it's because it's so simple. And yet a colleague of mine back in the day gave a talk called Why Johnny Can't Patch, about the sort of data profile of like how many people don't install security updates. And yeah, every once in a while they like screw up something, or they move a widget that you liked or something like that. But fundamentally, there's this like vast army of people out there that are figuring out how to find bugs in Windows or Mac OS or iOS. And we're always going to be patching those computers.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. I really like that idea of we're the custodians of other people's secrets. I think that you really hit it where like folks don't feel like that idea of like, oh, you might not have something to hide, you might not be targeted, like, oh, I'm not really that visible online, or I'm not controversial online, or what have you. But that online security and safety is important for everyone. Like, there are folks that I know that aren't visible online that have had their identity stolen, and that have had their Netflix accounts taken like hacked into, and that had nothing to do with them, being an SJW or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I really like that idea of like, you're doing this as a collective good, and also, you probably have more risk than you think you do.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the things I've been thinking about, like as we started going into lockdown the first few weeks, and like, I just had this moment a couple of weeks in where my brain just exploded, and I went, oh my God, online harassment's going to increase. Like, we are all online. We are all emotionally heightened. Some of us are emotionally fragile. Like, the levels of harassment are going to increase exponentially, and folks who are historically targeted might experience more targeting, and new folks might experience more targeting. And I'm kind of getting that sense anecdotally. Like, I don't have any actual data, but I'm wondering if you're seeing a similar thing, or in your work or in your communities, where people are it's just a little rougher out there.
Yeah, we're definitely starting to see upticks in specific types of harassment. Obviously, like, Zoom bombing has been all over the news now that everybody's using Zoom and other streaming services. Some of the weaknesses of those services transitioning from a sort of enterprisey product to the product that your like yoga studio and AA group uses. It's a very different threat model. And figuring out how to transition those sort of corporate-y products into a more consumer use case, I think has been a really interesting thing that's been happening.
Yeah.
There's also...
Can you say... Sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I don't think people know what a threat model means. Like...
Oh, good question. Yeah. So threat modeling is a term that comes out of sort of software security. As you're building new software products, you think about like, hey, I'm building this new tool to... share recipes, right? And as I think through my recipe sharing tool, sorry, this is like the most mundane example ever. My recipe sharing tool, I'm going to build a messaging system into it so that I can have like friends on the recipe tool and share recipes with them. And I'm sure your spidey sense is going off. Anytime you have a messaging tool within any sort of online service, there's the potential for abuse. So how could I, since I know that in the threat model of building messaging services, people are always going to like use them for bad things, like that's part of the modeling how people are going to use it. Maybe I'll say you can't actually send messages to people. You can only send them recipes. You can't actually have like free text content. It's like just the recipe link. That's the only thing you can send. So I'm saying like, I'm thinking through what are all the different ways somebody might like abuse this system and figuring out workarounds for them. So threat modeling is that process of being like, here's what the system looks like. Here's all the ways people are going to like poke at it and screw it up. And then mitigating those different ways people will screw it up.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot to think through.
I mean, this is people's whole jobs. Like, I was on a team of like 25 people at Microsoft that this was their entire job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, so why don't we get into some things that people can do? So let's start with like online safety hygiene. Like, what are your high level, like, you can do these right now to feel a little bit safer?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about the sort of various public safety, public health analogies, because I've actually been using the like public health analogies for long before the pandemic. I think a lot about the sort of history of medicine and how at some point like we developed the germ theory of disease. That was like a relatively recent thing, like late 1800s, and there was all this like skepticism of, oh well, there's just miasma and somehow that's like infecting people, versus like, actually, if you wash your hands, if you just wash your hands, particularly one of the places where this happened a lot was doctors transmitting childbed fever between women in hospitals. So there was this like whole thing of doctors were like, oh, I don't need to wash my hands. I am a gentleman. And then people were like, maybe you should wash your hands. And then they started washing their hands. And all these women like didn't die in childbirth. So the equivalent in computer security, I'm getting to the point here, is not reusing your passwords. So everybody, like, the default sort of behavior, because it's an obvious thing to do, is you have like your email address you sign up for everything with, and you probably use like kind of the same password everywhere. The unfortunate problem is that anytime, say I reuse that same password on my bank and like bobspetfood.com. I hope that this doesn't actually exist, and so that password is now more valuable because I've used it in more than one place. And if bobspetfood.com gets hacked, I really need to just register that domain name.
Just so you can have it. You're not encouraging people to do that. Yeah.
If bobspetfood.com gets hacked, then the attacker might take that password, if they've been storing it insecurely, and reuse it on your bank or your Gmail account or your Facebook. And this is an attack called credential stuffing. And we've really seen a rise in this over the past couple of years, where people will acquire just like a breach dump. So some website will be hacked. The attackers will get the entire database of usernames and passwords. And sometimes they have to decrypt the passwords, but it's a whole other thing. But they have this big database of usernames and passwords, and they will just take that database and try it against like Facebook and Gmail. And all of this is to say, you should use a different password at every site, because if one of them gets hacked, then they can't use that password to attack everything else.
Right.
And obviously, like, this would be totally ridiculous to try and remember. I have like 400 passwords in my password manager, at least. Nobody can remember that many passwords. So the second part of the tip is use a password manager.
Right.
And there's a bunch of good products out there: 1Password, Dashlane, LastPass, etc. Bitwarden is an open source one. There's a bunch of really good stuff out there at different sort of price points, including free. And it's all about the sort of that like public health piece of like reducing the value of any individual password to just be for that one website.
Yeah. So Down DD just asked, what's your thoughts on third-party password apps, which I think you just answered that you're very much for password managers. One of the other cool things about password managers is that they can auto-generate passwords for you. So you don't have to figure out what is a complex, involved password in that regard. So that's helpful. Panthera Anka says, why do we trust password managers?
That's a super, super good question. And that's why, like, it's one of those places where I'm willing to make like very specific recommendations. The top-rated password managers have been extensively beaten up by security researchers. 1Password, for example, employs a bunch of like actual cryptographers who know way more about math than I do, whose like judgment I trust really extensively. But in particular, that amount of scrutiny that they've had, one of the reasons we can trust this tool is that the companies that operate the password managers, they can't actually access your passwords. The passwords are encrypted to the long passphrase that you set up when you sign up for the password manager. So I have like a long passphrase of an epic pass poem about, which is a joke I stole from a webcomic, but about that's, you know, like multiple words. And to decrypt my password manager vault, where all my passwords are stolen, would take like past the heat death of the universe with our current understanding of cryptography.
Yeah, totally. So. I know that I'm not the expert here, although some would probably think that I am at this point when it comes to online safety. One thing that I recommend doing as well, and please feel free to chime in, is security questions are another place of weakness for folks, right? Because you're like, the name of your first cat, which you probably have a picture of on Facebook, or the street you grew up in, or your mother's maiden name, all of these things that are probably fairly publicly available in some ways. What I like to do is I like to use passwords for my security questions, and I put them in the password vault with my password logins so that I always have access to them, and that they're always harder to figure out. You can't just like guess to get into that.
100% the right strategy. And it actually leads to a lot of comedy when you call your bank and they're like, I just want to verify your maiden name. And I'm like, yeah, it's Q as in Quebec, 742, exclamation mark. She was raised by a computer.
Yeah, it's unpronounceable. It's
Right.
just a
Yeah.
symbol now. Yeah,
One
we're
of,
pulling
one
a
of the
Prince here.
things, one of the like superpowers you acquire by this kind of use of a password manager, diligent use of a password manager, is learning the international phonetic alphabet. You know, Alpha, Bravo,
Uh-huh.
Charlie, Echo, Delta,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
Delta,
absolutely.
Echo, etc. Because you end up having to like spell stuff out sometimes. But
Absolutely. Well, so
yeah.
I think another big one that is probably on people's minds, or if it's not, it should be. I'm now putting it on your mind if it wasn't before, is doxing. So, what is doxing and what do we do about it?
So, one of the consequences of the United States having basically no privacy laws is that there's all these like creepy data brokers that buy and sell your personal information. That personal information includes stuff like your home address. And what this can end up happening is that if somebody decides they have like beef with you, they go and they like internet stalk you and find your home address and potentially publish it on some shitty website or just Twitter. I mean, which is, yeah, anyway. And that non-consensual release of your personal information is referred to as doxing. The term comes from the phrase dropping your docs or your documents. And these are just your documents, right? Publishing your
This is
documents.
super nerdy old school troll culture.
Yes, pretty much. So, you know, there is hope. There's a couple of new pieces of legislation in California and Washington State that actually set some new rules around security, around privacy expectations for commercial entities. And my hope is that these new pieces of legislation are going to dampen the effect of these like shady data broker companies in the sort of medium and longer term. But for now, what folks can do while they're like stuck at home, one of the things you can do is just Google yourself. So you Google your name and your city, and you see what comes up. And you might Google your name and like your street name, and see if your name and info is in any of these like creepy data broker websites. And then they all have like varying degrees of opt-out processes. You have to like, there's always that like spinner that waits for like, that makes you wait while it's like calculating your threat score or like searching databases, and it's just like bullshit. It's just making you wait. But then you can go through the like opt-out process and get your information taken down from these.
Cool. Highly
Yeah.
recommend. And that I feel like is related to your analogy of flossing. Like you need to do that regularly.
Yeah.
Because things will pop up, your information will keep popping up, and
Mm-hmm.
start being more mindful about where you're putting that information online.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think folks don't think about is like someone asks for your address and you just send it through email. But what about that whole thing that we just talked about where if somebody else's email gets hacked, then your
Yeah.
information is public, for example? And so
Mm-hmm.
be mindful about how you're sharing your private information, where on the internet you're putting it, and also verifying regularly on these data broker sites and trying to get them taken down.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to reframe a tiny thing there, which is about the idea of like being careful about where we put our information. Yes, we have to do that, but unfortunately, because the privacy laws in the U.S. are so lax, there a lot of this stuff happens like without your consent, without your action, and so you have to take proactive steps to remove this data, even if you never consented to have it for it to be public in the first place. And that's one of the sort of frustrating things about all of this.
Cool. Can we go back to the password managers really quick? So I'm using a new app to stream this, and I want to see if this works, where I can just send the question to the broadcast. So I'm just going to do that here and see what happens. The question is, how should we store our password manager's password in case something happens to us?
That's a super good question. There's a couple of different, if people want to like really nerd out on this, the thing you want to Google is Shamir's secret sharing for the actual like cryptography version of it. But one thing you can do, you know, put half of the password somewhere in your house and half of the password give to like your lawyer if you do like a will setup, and maybe like a couple of trusted family members, with instructions for, you know, should something bad happen to me. Because that's one of the things that people are sort of planning around right now is, what if I get really sick? And the like really kind of dark version of it is like digital estate planning. What do, you know, if I not just get really sick, but I'm actually like incapacitated, how do I handle my like digital assets? There's sort of I'm totally blanking on the name. Literary executors used to be a thing where if you were like a writer, you would appoint someone your like literary executor to take care of your sort of uh, your literary estate, the copyright of your writings and that kind of thing. And I feel like there's this huge unmet need for how to figure out like where your electronic estate goes. There's a service that I really like called Cake. That's basically there used to be a service called Get Your Shit Together that would like walk you through setting up wills and stuff. This got really dark really quickly. I'm sorry.
No,
but
this is useful.
Yeah. So I will pull up the. I don't actually have the URL off the top of my head, but
we'll link it in the. So we're gonna upload these videos to YouTube /games hotline, and so we'll add this into the show notes there. So anyone that wants any of these links will, because we don't have it right now, we'll put them over there.
Yeah. So thinking about that sort of, that is a really good question of like that, I'm using this hyper secure setup of a password manager. What happens if something happens to me? Because it's actually going to be way harder to take over all my accounts. And that, split up your password between a couple of trusted people, that kind of setup is a good way to do that kind of planning.
Yeah.
And also, like when you tell people that stuff, like you might want to let them know where your backup codes for your two-factor authentication are, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When you like print out those backup codes. Yeah.
Well, so let's I'm trying to figure out which. So I do actually. Let's do this. I want to talk about 2FA, but there is a question in chat about how do we find a list of data broker websites?
That's a super good question. There's a couple of different. ProPublica has a good piece about data brokers. If you look. So you don't even necessarily need to find a master list because what really matters is which ones you personally are on. But the general sort of tactic I give to people is, you figure out, you Google yourself, you see if there's listings of your home address, and then say it's like creepywebsite.com, Google creepywebsite.com opt out, and that'll lead you to the page for the opt out instructions for that particular website.
Okay, cool. So yeah, let's get into 2FA. What is it, and use it? I'm like, yes. I thought you like, should you use it? But I mean, just use it.
Yes, you should definitely use it. So two-factor authentication, there's a couple of different forms of it. The one that people are usually most familiar with is you get a text, you go to log into a website and then you get a text message to your phone with the code and you type in the code. That's like somewhat secure. There's some security issues around SMS that are sort of complicated to get into for the margins of this video stream. But the next more secure version is the little app that has a code that changes every 30 seconds. There's a bunch of different apps that do this. I use one called Authy, Authy. That's Twilio makes it. And the reason I like Authy is that it lets you back up your codes between devices. Not that I'm traveling right now, but because I'm not a citizen, and this is where I get a little bit like tinfoil hat, but when I travel outside of the US, I travel on a different cell phone. Because I'm not a citizen, I can be compelled to unlock my phone at the border. And again, being the custodian of other people's secrets, I don't want the CBP looking through my text messages. That's not cool. So I just don't have any text messages with me when I go across the border.
I'll also add to that too, like not just a citizenship issue. Like as someone who is a citizen here, like there are like crossing borders is a real thing. One Password will actually, they have a service. So 1Password is probably one of the most expensive of the password managers, but it's also very good. But it also has a service where you can like close down your vault so that if you are compelled to open your phone for a border officer or some kind of customs officer, there won't be anything there to see. So that's not the same as text messages, but it is a service that they offer.
It's at least part of your sort of, it's again, that threat model, you're narrowing the scope of what they can see.
Yeah. I'll also say that as someone, even as a citizen here, when I travel internationally, I use a different SIM card. So I can't get the 2FA passwords. I can't get the 2FA login codes. So using alternative apps or alternative ways of getting codes that aren't based on my phone number are really useful for me when I'm somewhere in the world and need to get into my email.
So the app-based 2FA, super convenient. You have to like type it in, no big deal. My actual favorite, and I get to do the like YouTube beauty influencer, like show the thing on the screen shot, if I can do this right. So this is called a YubiKey. It's got, on one side it's got lightning, and I'm sorry my screen is so blown out. And on the other side it's got USB-C. And this magic little device, my sort of running joke, but it's not really a joke, is if John Podesta had had one of these for his two-factor on his Gmail account, we'd probably have a different president. This device lets you do 2FA in such a smart way that it's actually like phishing proof. Because you type those codes in from the app or from your SMS, you could potentially still be tricked into typing those into not google.com, like a fake phishing website. This device actually like authenticates to Google or Facebook or Dropbox or various other services that support it, and knows that it's definitely sending the code to the right website. So if you have one of these on your accounts and you consistently use it to log in, it is basically the strongest protection that you can have on your account security. And when people think about hacking, I think this is one of the big sort of transitions of the past like 5-10 years of how people think about computer security. Is we used to all worry about getting like viruses on our computer, getting our actual devices broken into, and people don't really do that anymore. They do a little bit, and there's like ransomware and all this stuff, but really account compromise is the big thing right now. It's the thing that people need to stress about, and one of the strongest things that people can do right now is use a security key. Yubico is the most well-known one, but there's open source ones, and there's ones that are as little as like $10, $12. Super strong security measure that anybody can take.
Awesome. I have a question for you that I think might be useful for folks. Since we're talking about like, you know, all these different aspects of like communication and, you know, like being able to access different accounts and that sort of thing. Like, what is the difference? I mean, without going, I don't want you to go into why SMS is that's a huge thing. I know we're not going to go into it. You can look that up. But like, what is the difference between sending like, you know, an iPhone message, a Facebook Messenger message, Signal, WhatsApp, like these different communication platforms have different levels of security and safety, and what should we know about when we choose how and where to communicate?
Yeah. So at this point, all of these tools are encrypted in one way or another. But there's different levels, there's different strengths of encryption. And fundamentally, the big thing to understand is, can the service provider, so Facebook, Google, Apple, et cetera, can they see the contents of your message? And there's a couple of tools out there where they actually can't see the contents of your message. So if I send you a message on Facebook Messenger, my message is encrypted from me to Facebook servers, and then from Facebook servers to you. But it lives on Facebook servers in plain text. It's, you know, Facebook can run their like machine learning algorithms on our messages and figure out different ways to sell products to us and stuff like that. Now, if I send you that same message on WhatsApp, from me to you on WhatsApp, it is encrypted from my actual physical phone using keys that only you and I have like access to those keys. So Facebook, who owns WhatsApp, can't actually read the message between you and me because of how the encryption is designed. And the encryption in WhatsApp is very similar to implemented by some of the same folks as the encryption in a messenger called Signal that not everybody's heard of. Definitely recommend checking it out. It is basically like the most secure and privacy preserving messenger out there. It's run by a nonprofit. And, you know, as we were sort of going into this conversation, I was thinking like, what is not just the technical tips, but the sort of interpersonal tips of staying sane and healthy in these times. And when I talk to folks about online harassment and staying like psychologically healthy under duress, social support and social connection is so important. And having like trusted channels to be able to talk to your friends and loved ones. Normally I would be like, have your like in-person support network and go get a hug from somebody. And obviously like we can't do that right now, and that sucks. So you should install Signal instead and make sure that your friends are using Signal and that you have like secure channels to reach out to folks. Should bad things like your Gmail getting hacked or your Facebook getting hacked, should things like that happen, you know that you're going to have that secure channel to be able to reach out to people.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think the emotional support and the community that you can build around you in times of difficulty is really what gets you through them. You know,
Yeah,
when people
absolutely.
ask me like, what is the one thing I can do? And I'm like, really, we could sit here all day. I mean, we are talking about all of these different things that you can do to be safer, but really getting through that emotionally and having people
Yeah.
around you that will validate you, will, whether they understand or not, they believe you that these things are happening to you and that you can
Yeah.
turn to when you're feeling helpless and out of control.
Yeah.
So building those emotional communities is really valuable. The other thing is that those communities can support you more than just emotionally. So, say you're being harassed on Twitter. Say you have a stalker. Say you have these, toxic some kind of toxic interactions that are happening digitally, and it's overwhelming you and you don't want to take in all of that harm. You can get someone to log into your Twitter and just make sure that there's no threats coming in, or if there are, to screen cap them, and then decide what to do with them. So just giving yourself a little bit of distance from the actual day-to-day or moment-to-moment harm, having trusted community members that you've already set up this relationship with ahead of time, can be really valuable.
And that's a really good point, around having that sort of like um, actual oh, I'm totally blanking on a word here. Practical assistance, having folks look at your mentions, keep an eye out for particular types of online behavior that you're stressed about so that you don't have to be the one looking at it. It's a good time to give a shout out to Tracy Chu's Block Together tool. We can add it in the show links, but actual like Twitter client that does some of this stuff. It's pretty neat. And I think that's, one of the cool things about getting to work on the problem, the actual like technical problems around online harassment, which is what I'm doing at work, is, you know, how long I've been working on this stuff. It's been even before you and I got to know each other. I'd been working on it for about 5 years already. And getting to build the tools that I'd wish I'd had in that time leading up to various like nasty things happening on the internet, is it's a I feel really lucky to actually get to work on these hard problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So tallpoppy.com, check it out. Very
That's
important.
us. Yep.
We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I think that like there's a bunch of random questions in the chat. Do you mind if we kind of bounce back and
Yeah,
forth a little bit?
let's do some rapid fire.
Yeah, so here's a couple. Let's do this one. How carefully should we actually read every single one of the TOSs? Like, I feel like that's a very personal
that I wrote
yeah.
with our lawyer.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very personal one.
It is definitely a very personal one to your like sort of personal risk model. I definitely know a lot of folks who are sort of very diligent about reading that kind of thing. I personally just feel like I would never get anything done if I did, and so I kind of trust that like the sort of many eyes thing, like if there's something like really shady, somebody will find it. I think a good example of that is, and I won't name the specific service, but it's pretty easy to find if people recognize this story. There was a service that would scrape your Gmail in order to like unsubscribe you from newsletters. And this is a pretty cool service, right? Turns out they were selling all of your email to other companies. Super shady, right? And actually, that's a sort of segue to a specific technical point. The one I don't necessarily read the terms of service, but what I do look really closely at is when I log into something with Facebook or Twitter or Gmail, what are the permissions that service is asking for? I don't give anything permission to my Gmail. Because the thing with your email account, whatever your main email account is, if it's Gmail or something else, that's like the keys to the kingdom. If I can break into someone's email account, I can break into all of their other accounts because I can do password resets. So being very careful what permissions you grant. Twitter likewise has sort of, is it just read access? Is it read write? Is it read write in DMs? I don't give anything access to my DMs. It's like, so yeah. Each of these different services has a place in the settings where you can go and like look at what you've granted access. So that's one of those like, getting your quarterly teeth cleaning or twice a year teeth cleaning, like go and look in your settings of your different apps, Twitter, Facebook, and Google being the big ones, and see what you've authorized. and maybe like think about deleting some of those.
Yeah, oh, totally. This is another good question from the same user. Thank you. How do we get everyone else in our networks to use safe programs and systems?
Man, yeah, it's a really tough one. A lot of patience, some gentle pleading. I think the one thing particularly with family members and stuff, they'll often complain. If you're like the more technical person in your family, they'll be like, oh my God, I'm locked out of this account again. The good news about password managers, right? So there's like some evangelizing to do, and often there's going to be like some patience required of like sitting with people and walking them through stuff, which obviously is a little normal right now, but yeah.
Yeah. There's actually a bunch of questions that came through around estate planning, digital estate planning. I don't know how much you know about that, but like maybe I'll just pop up a couple, and if you have answers, we can go through them.
Hit me with a couple. My dad's an estate lawyer in Canada, so I grew up around a lot of this stuff. I am definitely not a lawyer. Part of why I went to work at the ACLU was to figure out if I wanted to go to law school. Decided not to.
Nice.
But I can definitely I can point at some resources around this stuff for sure.
So oh nope, sorry, that's not the one I wanted to put up there. Tanya, hey, shout out Tanya. Go check out her channel. I think that you were gonna give us a link for the post broadcast here, but are there services for digital estate planning, power of attorney for online presence? Does that exist? Is that what you were gonna link to earlier?
Man, so there's a service. The service I mentioned is called Cake. It's joincake.com, and they walk you through this like nice checklist of all of the different pieces. The big pieces of there's everybody knows about a will. There's power of attorney for personal care. It might have different names in different places, but basically sort of like your medical directives, like what do you want to have happen if you're medically incapacitated. And then you can write some stuff into your will or various other documents about like what you want to have happen with your online accounts. Some people want their shit deleted. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but yes. some people want all of their presence to be deleted. Some people want to donate it to the Library of Congress or whatever research university they're affiliated with. This is where the sort of like literary executor type stuff comes up. I'm definitely like not any sort of expert in this stuff, but I think Cake is a really good place to start for thinking about this. And also like your friendly neighborhood estate attorney, they really are, I'm biased because my dad is one, but they're like really wonderful people that like want to help you figure out how to like have your legacy be what you want it to be.
Yeah, great. The other thing I want to put out there, which is sort of, but nope, not related to this at all. Oh, here's a question about that. Well, so when you buy a house, you put your house in your name. Yes. And I know that this has come up several times for some friends who are high profile. Like, what do we do around the public record of home ownership?
So this is definitely like a talk to an estate's attorney situation. But typically what people do is they buy the house in a trust, and the trust isn't like so-and-so name trust. It's like unrelated mythical creature trust, whatever. And the trustee is someone who's not them. So that's the like hardcore privacy way to do it. The kind of whack-a-mole way to do it is you buy it under your name anyway, and you make sure that you keep on top of the various like creepy websites that have your information. Unfortunately, this is one of those places where privacy ends up being a tax on more vulnerable people. Because it's not free to set up that trust, and there's like tax implications, and it's freaking complicated, and lawyers are kind of expensive. So the answers aren't super great around the house buying process. On the other hand, if you're buying a house, like you have a little bit of money to spend on a lawyer. So.
Fair. So here's a question from Data Friend. What is the threshold of good enough security? Like if people just want to do the bare minimum, what do they do?
Bare minimum, use different passwords, and they don't even need to use a password manager. They just have to be like actually unique. Use different passwords that you don't use anywhere else on Google or whatever your email is, Twitter, Facebook, Dropbox, and any other like core social media accounts you care about. Different passwords on those. if everyone who's watching this stream just goes and does that, I will be like so happy. And you can write the passwords down. You can write the passwords down and stick them under your pillow until you remember them. Like don't put them up on your window or something. Like the key is making sure that those core sort of keys to the kingdom accounts don't have a password that's reused on stupid accounts, like stupid low security accounts like poor Bob and his pet food supply.
Is it worth going? So, for example, in my password manager, it'll prompt me and be like, these passwords are this many months old if you want to change them. And every now and again, I'll go through and look and be like, what the fuck was this? And I'm like, oh, it's because I needed this one thing once. I ordered this one thing once. Is it worth going through and deleting all those random accounts? Like,
so the official guidance from the National Institutes of Science and Technology changed about this a couple of years ago, and it made all of my security friends like so happy, because password rotation is stupid. Like, you don't need to do it if you're using otherwise good practices like having unique passwords. So you signed up for some one-off, like I bought some shoes on some website that Instagram told me about.
Never done that. What are you talking about?
Definitely never done that. And I would have made an account and it would have had a unique password. I never need to change that password. It does not matter.
Is it worth deleting the account? Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. So deleting the account is a really good question. Particularly, we're talking about online shopping. That's going to have your postal address in it, which is like more sensitive data. You might want to go and delete it. Unfortunately, a lot of websites make it really like difficult and a pain to delete accounts. So, I mean, you could just replace it with like a wrong address or something. But yeah, rotating passwords, if you have good practice. So rotating passwords was a sort of countermeasure for people having crappy passwords. But obviously people would be like, example password 1. Oh, I have to change my password? Now it's example password 2, right? And so it wouldn't actually increase anybody's security.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
All right. All right. If you have any more questions, please drop them in because we have a few more minutes. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about Tall Poppy if you feel up for it.
Yeah,
I'm
for sure.
Really, really excited about what you're doing with it. I got a little sneak peek and it looks amazing. So please, please do your elevator pitch thing.
So fundamentally, I've been trying for years to figure out like how do we actually get, resources to be able to help support people who are dealing with online harassment situations. And the thing that I eventually figured out is one of the places where there's actually like resources in the system are that companies care about their employees' sort of psychological safety, but also like physical and personal safety when they are exposed to like crappy internet behavior in the course of their work. So whether it's because you have a trust and safety team, a support team, maybe you have sort of high profile people at your organization, like developer evangelists who are constantly like, well, in the before times are constantly going to conferences and like meeting people. And some percentage of those people will be like inappropriate or stalky or whatever. You want to keep those people safe. You want to figure out how to keep those people safe. And so there's resources in the system in the same way as a company might have like an employee assistance program that does like therapy referrals. Hey, what if there was an organization that they could go to help their employees like with their actual practical personal security stuff, but also should there be some sort of harassment situation, there's a place that they can call and get expert, compassionate security advice. And I think that's one of the things that's like unique about us. The security people, we're not exactly known for our like fantastic bedside manner. But the team that I've built is made up of people who have both security expertise, but also that sort of like trauma aware sensitivity and ability to like speak compassionately with people and not just be like, well, why didn't you use a password manager? Rah! Like that doesn't help somebody who's in a crisis.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's what we're trying to.
And I think that trauma aware is, and like, well, honestly, most therapists aren't even trauma informed, right? Like, we should. I think.
How do you end up being a therapist?
It's not required. So we were actually just talking behind the scenes about like having an episode of Good Tips for Hard Times about like how to find a therapist, like what that means. Because I feel like that's related to this. Is I think it's really important that a lot of this work is rooted in being compassionate and having an understanding of what it means to be going through a crisis and an extremely difficult time. And thinking about these things can be really frightening and bring up a lot. And so, the fact that your team is aware of that and really puts that at the forefront when engaging with companies and the individuals at those companies. And this is so needed. Like, so I think of journalists especially. We've seen several stories over the year. I mean, many, but there's a couple I'm thinking of off the top of my head where like these outlets are not supporting their employees, and their employees are being raked online. And like, I think it's really important that it becomes an issue of workplace rights, I guess. Like,
Yep.
It is
Absolutely.
like employees.
It's a sustainability thing.
Yeah.
It's a retention thing. It's like a basic human decency thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, I'm really, really excited about that. If any of y'all work at companies that you think could benefit from the work that Tall Poppy is doing, please reach out to them. I will personally vouch for how awesome their work is. Yeah, absolutely. And this is a little bit early, but one of the things that we're doing with the Games and Online Harassment Hotline is that we're creating a chatbot that can walk you through locking down your online safety. So this is more targeted towards individuals and folks who want to do some of this work, but want a little bit of guidance and hand-holding around that. So that's not out yet, but if you subscribe to all of our things, we will let you know when that is available. But it is currently in development. I'm really excited about it.
I'm super excited about it too.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that is the most exciting about your work and our work is that we're building capacity. We know that there's this like big problem out there of online harassment, just in terms of the sheer volume of it, and starting to build some capacity of people that are trained in how to respond to it, tools that are, again, trauma aware. It's so important.
Yeah, totally. Well, happy little safety families.
Yay!
Doing our thing to make people feel better online.
Trying to help people feel better. Yeah.
So, Leigh, thank you so much for doing
this
this with me.
Thanks for inviting me.
We'll have to do this again sometime. I think that we could do like a part 2 and get into some of the more nitty gritty aspects of some of these.
And talk about SMS security for like half an hour.
Yeah,
I won't do that.
Yeah, we could just do like communication and actually explaining what encryption means. Like I've had these explained to me several times, and I think it's really let's do that. I want to thank all of the mods, all of our amazing mods who come in and help us every week on our channel to make sure that our chat is safe and delightful for everyone as well. Also, I want to thank everyone who tuned in. I know we had some issues last week. I'm really glad we were able to sort that out and that you were able to be here live with us. I really love the interactive part of this and getting your feedback in real time. So thank you. We will be here every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific time with a new expert to talk about new tips for hard times. Just in case you aren't familiar, the Games and Online Harassment Hotline is and will be a free resource for everyone. We are an emotional support service for folks in and around the games industry. So if you want to donate to help us build up our capacity and keep this resource free for everyone, you can do that at gameshotline.org/donate. And then join us next week because we're going to be talking to Caden Mack, the executive director of 18 Million Rising, about the increase in Asian American racism and what we can do about it. So thank you again and tune in next week. Bye.